Howdy, Immortalium here, and I don't think I've mentioned it on this channel yet, certainly not in a video, but I recently set up a horror channel where I discuss horror movies and my experiences, etc, etc. And one of the things I was discussing over there was something called the Disturbing Movie Iceberg, which contains, of course, a lot of horror movies and a lot of very disturbing content. But something that I found quite fascinating is, if you take a look here, this is actually an anime. And it's quite fascinating to me that this movie is on the same level as some of these other movies in this list. So I thought it might be interesting to take a look at what this anime is and why it is so controversial. So starting off, I guess the most basic thing to point out is that this movie came out in 1992. And apparently it is an adaptation of a manga, which in and of itself uses a trope, a Japanese trope. I believe the trope is called Shoujo Tsubaki. And from what I can gather, the basic premise is that a young girl, moves to a circus and works at a circus. That's how the trope works as far as I'm aware. Now, before we actually start looking at this movie itself, I do think it is worth mentioning just before we take a look at it, that the person who created this film, Hiroshi Harada, directed this movie, storyboarded this movie, wrote this movie, and animated this movie all by himself. From 1987 to 1992, he spent 5 years of his life working on the film, and actually spent his life savings on it as well, which is quite fascinating to me. When I did some research into this film and who the man was, I was actually quite surprised to see that he actually does have a career beyond this movie. He's worked on some other anime series. He's done quite a bit of work with Square Enix, interestingly, on video games, mostly in the legal department. So from that perspective, I was actually quite surprised. But getting back to the film itself, so the basic premise of this story is that there's this young girl. I believe she's meant to be about 12, but I'm not 100% on that. And her mom, who's very sick. One day she returns to find that her mom has passed away, and eventually she finds herself working at the circus. When she's at the circus, she is abused in multiple ways. There's some very graphic content regarding animals and the treatment of animals. In particular, one particular scene, but I don't want to say too much about that. And many people argue that it is a very disturbing, depressing film. From what I can tell, because I haven't been able to get my hands on this film, it certainly does seem that way. Beyond that, there are a couple of other areas I want to kind of look at. So first off, one thing that is kind of interesting to me is that this movie does have a different name in the West, or can have a different name, I should probably say, which is Mr. Arashi's Amazing Freak Show, which I guess refers to the circus itself. And I've also seen a lot of reports that it's been banned in Japan, as well as apparently in a lot of other countries. Now, unfortunately, in my research, I wasn't able to actually find any definitive proof that it is banned in Japan or in other countries. All I've heard is, just people saying it. But I haven't been able to find, for instance, on the Japanese film board, them specifically saying this movie is banned. If you can find something very specific like that, where, it's actually from the horse's mouth, so to speak, I would love you to inform me of that, because I would find that very interesting. But despite some articles stating that it's banned the world over, in 2006, it actually got a DVD release in France, and apparently the DVD release was pretty much uncensored. I mean, if it got a release in France in 2006, clearly it's not banned the world over. So I'm it's a bit nebulous about that whole banning situation, but I do think it's important to note because of the fact that so many people mentioned it is banned in Japan and in other countries. Now, having not seen the film, I can't comment on the quality of the storytelling, but what I can comment on actually is the animation itself, because I've seen clips from it. And the artwork and animation here is quite interesting. Artistically, I do think it has a decent look to it, a decent art style. It is a little on the rougher side, but I do think from a visual aesthetic, it's pleasant enough looking. When it comes to the animation itself, however, this is where it gets a little odder. As I mentioned before, Hiroshi Harada animated this all by himself, and what that means is that this movie is quite stiff in many ways. There aren't that many scenes of animation, but nonetheless, even if the movie is a little basic when it comes to actual animation, I do find it quite commendable that the guy himself animated all of the movie, and apparently from what I've heard, there's still some very interesting forms of animation. In particular, a scene at a circus later in the film. I haven't seen this scene specifically myself, but apparently it's actually a very well animated, kind of trippy sequence. So yeah, if we're comparing it to, like, you know, other anime films or other forms of animation, yeah, it's an exceedingly basic animated work. But I do still find it quite commendable given that it was only one person who made it. And speaking on that topic, I do find it quite fascinating to me, and kind of, you know, I'm kind of admire the guy a little bit, because he really put everything into this. Clearly he put 5 years of his life into making this movie. He spent his life savings on this movie. When someone does that, I can't help but respect them. And regardless of the quality of the movie itself, which I've heard from some people consider it to be an awful piece of trash, and some other people think it's an underrated work that does have a deeper message. I do think the way that this was produced does mean that it deserves to be at least discussed and analysed. Now, whether I'll ever be able to actually see this film and to be able to give my own thoughts on it, I'm not sure. The DVD, as far as I can tell from France, isn't available anymore, which I think is a shame. So unless I can find it secondhand, I do have some skepticism that this movie will get a release in the future. But I guess it's not impossible. So yeah, I think it's just a fascinating little story behind this film, and that's why I wanted to bring a bit of attention to it. So that was my discussion on Midori, also known as Shoujo Tsubaki, also known as Mr. Arashi's Amazing Freak Show. And of course, I would absolutely love to hear your thoughts on all of this. For instance, had you heard of this movie before? If you have, how? Have you seen any footage from the film? Or in the case that you've actually somehow seen the whole film, what were your thoughts on it? Did you like it? Did you dislike it? What are your thoughts on the story of the production? Do you know any lists where it's definitively proven that this film is in fact banned either in Japan or in other countries in the world? And of course, if you have any other additional information about this film, about Hiroshi Harada, etc., please leave it in the comments below. Of course, if you want to support the channel, I would encourage you to use my Amazon and Right Stuff affiliate links in the description below. When you purchase an anime or manga through those affiliate links, not only supporting me, not only supporting the channel, but you're also supporting the anime and manga industry. So I'd highly encourage you to purchase your anime and manga through those affiliate links. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to comment, rate, subscribe, and bye bye.